Part 1. The Unwanted Woman. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she stood there waiting. The matrimonial agency smelled of old paper and broken dreams. It was 1885 in Boston, and the city was full of women like her, hoping for a chance at something better. Her name was Catherine, and she clutched a worn carpetbag so tightly her knuckles had turned white. At 32 years old, she knew exactly what people thought when they looked at her. Too old past her prime, a spinster with no prospects. The other women in the agency were younger, prettier, more hopeful. They whispered and giggled as they read letters from prospective husbands out west. Catherine tried not to listen, tried not to feel the familiar sting of being invisible. Mrs. Pemberton, the agency director, was a stern woman with silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She looked at Catherine the way people look at stray dogs they feel sorry for but don't really want to help. "Miss Catherine," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice carrying that particular tone of pity that made Catherine's stomach turn. "I have one more letter for you, one more." Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Catherine had already been rejected 7 times. 7 men who had written to her seemed interested at first, then found reasons to back away once they learned her real age. One had been brutally honest in his rejection letter, writing that he needed a young wife who could give him many children and work hard for many years. At her age, he wrote, she was neither young enough nor strong enough. The words had stung, but Catherine couldn't argue with the truth of them. Society had rules, and she had broken the most important one by not marrying young. "This gentleman," Mrs. Pemberton continued, pulling out a single sheet of rough paper, "is from the Colorado mountains. A Mr. Garrett, he's not particular about age or appearance." Catherine felt her heart sink even lower. Not particular. That meant desperate. That meant no one else would have him either. "May I see the letter?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Pemberton handed it over, and Catherine's eyes scanned the brief, almost crude words. The handwriting was rough but legible, the sentences short and direct. "I am a man alone in the mountains. I need a wife to help me survive the winters. I can provide shelter, food, and protection. I don't care about your age or what you look like. I just need someone strong enough to work and honest enough to stay. If you're willing, come to Timber Ridge, Colorado. Ask for James Garrett at the trading post." There was no poetry in it, no false promises of love or happiness, just the bare facts of survival. Catherine read it 3 times, feeling something strange twist in her chest. Was this really what her life had come to? Accepting a proposal from a man so desperate he didn't even care what she looked like. "He's offering to pay your travel expenses," Mrs. Pemberton added. "He sent money with the letter. That's more than most do." Catherine looked up at the older woman. "What do you know about him?" Mrs. Pemberton shrugged. "Only what the letter says. He's in the mountains far from any real town. It will be a hard life, Miss Catherine. Harder than anything you've known here in the city." "And if I don't go?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then you stay here, working at the dress shop, living in that boarding house room, growing older every day until—" Mrs. Pemberton didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Until what? Until she was too old to work? Until she was thrown out onto the streets? Until she died alone and unmissed in a city that had no use for unmarried women past their youth? Catherine thought about her life in Boston. She'd been orphaned at 12 when both her parents died of influenza within days of each other. She'd been sent to work as a seamstress, sewing 14 hours a day for barely enough money to pay for a tiny room and 1 meal a day. She'd watched other girls get married, start families, build lives. She'd watched herself become invisible as the years passed, and her face showed the marks of hard work and harder living. What did she have to lose? "I'll go," Catherine said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff into darkness. Mrs. Pemberton nodded, no surprise in her expression. "I'll make the arrangements. The train leaves in 3 days. Pack light, only what you absolutely need. The journey will be long and difficult, 3 days." Catherine had 3 days to say goodbye to the only life she'd ever known. She spent those days in a daze, mechanically folding her few belongings into the carpet bag. Her landlady at the boarding house seemed almost relieved to see her go, immediately advertising the room to someone who could pay more. The women at the dress shop where she worked barely said goodbye, too busy with their own lives to care much about hers. On the morning she left, Catherine stood on the train platform with her bag and the envelope containing her ticket and travel documents. The early morning air was cool, and fog rolled in from the harbor, making the city look like something from a dream or a nightmare. She thought about turning back, about saying this was all a mistake. But where would she go? Back to that tiny room? Back to sewing until her eyes gave out and her fingers were too bent to hold a needle? No. Whatever waited for her in the Colorado mountains, it had to be better than slowly disappearing in Boston. The train whistle blew, loud and sharp, cutting through the fog. Catherine picked up her bag and climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. As the train pulled away from the station, she watched Boston fade into the mist behind her. She was heading west, toward mountains she'd never seen, to marry a man she'd never met, to live a life she couldn't even imagine. The woman sitting across from her was young, maybe 19, with bright eyes and a pretty smile. She was also heading west to marry a man she'd met through letters. "Isn't it exciting?" the young woman said. "My Henry writes such beautiful letters. He has a farm in Kansas with a big house and fields of wheat. He says I'll love it there." Catherine managed a small smile. "I'm sure you will. Where are you going?" The girl asked. "Colorado." "The mountains. Oh, how romantic. What does your gentleman do?" Catherine hesitated. "He's a trapper. He lives alone in the wilderness." The girl's eyes widened slightly and Catherine could see the question forming. Why would a man like that need a mail-order bride? What was wrong with him? But the girl was too polite to ask, so she just smiled again and said, "I'm sure it will be wonderful." Catherine turned back to the window, watching the landscape change as the train carried her further and further from everything she knew. She thought about James Garrett and his blunt letter. She wondered what kind of man he was, what kind of life awaited her. And deep down, in a place she barely dared to acknowledge, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, being wanted by a desperate man was still better than being unwanted by everyone else. The train rattled on through the day and into the night, carrying Catherine toward her uncertain future, toward the mountains, toward a man who had asked for a wife the way someone might ask for a plow or an axe, a tool for survival. That's what she was now. And somehow that felt more honest than all the pretty lies she'd heard in her life about love and marriage and happiness. At least James Garrett was honest about what he needed. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. As darkness fell outside the train window, Catherine closed her eyes and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. But her imagination failed her. The future was a blank space, empty and waiting. All she could do was keep moving forward, 1 mile at a time, toward whatever fate had in store for her in those distant mountains. Part 2. The Journey to Nowhere. The train journey west took 3 weeks, and every day felt longer than the last. Catherine watched through the window as the landscape changed from crowded cities to open farmland, then to endless prairie that stretched as far as she could see. She shared a compartment with 3 other mail-order brides, all younger than her. They were excited, chattering constantly about their future husbands, sharing letters they'd read so many times the paper was thin and creased. Lucy was 18 and heading to a rancher in Wyoming. She had rosy cheeks and couldn't stop giggling. "My William says he has 50 head of cattle and a house with real glass windows." Hannah was 23 and more reserved, but still hopeful. Her intended was a shopkeeper in a mining town. "He seems kind from his letters." That's what matters most, don't you think? The third girl, Victoria, was 20 and beautiful, with golden hair and green eyes. She was going to marry a banker in Denver, and clearly thought herself a cut above the others. She looked at Catherine with barely concealed disdain. "How old are you?" Victoria asked one evening, her tone making it clear she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. 32, Catherine said quietly. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Oh my, and you're only just now getting married?" "Victoria," Hannah said sharply, "that's rude. I'm just surprised, that's all. Most women are married by 20 at the latest, unless—" Victoria let the sentence hang, the implication clear, unless something was wrong with them. Catherine felt her face flush but kept her voice steady. "Some of us didn't have the advantages others did." Victoria turned away with a little sniff and the conversation moved on. But Catherine caught Lucy staring at her sometimes with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked like fear, as if being 32 and unmarried was a disease that might be catching. The train stopped at various towns along the way, and passengers got on and off. At each stop, Catherine wondered if she should get off too, find work somewhere, start over. But she never did. She just stayed in her seat, watching the prairie roll by, moving ever closer to the mountains. At night, lying in the cramped sleeping compartment, she would listen to the other girls whisper about their dreams. Lucy wanted 6 children. Hannah hoped her husband liked to read. Victoria planned to have the finest house in Denver. Catherine stayed silent. She had no dreams anymore, only a growing sense of dread about what awaited her. After 10 days on the train, they reached Denver. Victoria departed with her trunk and hat boxes, barely saying goodbye. 2 days later, Hannah left for her mining town, and Lucy continued on to Wyoming. Catherine was alone for the last leg of the journey, riding in a nearly empty car as the train climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner and colder. Snow appeared on the distant peaks, gleaming white against the blue sky. She'd never seen mountains before. They were both beautiful and terrifying, so much bigger than anything she'd imagined. They made her feel impossibly small, like a speck of dust blown by the wind. The train finally stopped at a small town called Ridgemont. It was barely a town at all, just a cluster of wooden buildings along a single dirt street. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and the sun seemed brighter than it ever had in Boston. Catherine stood on the platform with her bag, unsure what to do next. A stagecoach sat waiting, and the driver, an older man with a weathered face, called out to her. "You the mail-order bride heading to Timber Ridge?" Catherine winced at how loudly he said it, as if announcing her business to the whole town. But she nodded. "Well, climb aboard then. We leave in 10 minutes. The stagecoach was cramped and uncomfortable, bouncing over rough roads that climbed ever higher into the mountains. Catherine shared it with a traveling salesman and a mining engineer, both men who barely acknowledged her existence. They stopped at various settlements, places so small they made Ridgemont look like a city. The salesman got off at a mining camp. The engineer departed at a sawmill town, and then Catherine was alone with just the driver as the coach continued climbing. The road getting narrower and rougher, the forest pressing in on both sides. "How much further?" she finally asked. "Another hour to the trading post," the driver said. "That's as far as I go. Your man will have to meet you there or you'll have to walk to his place. Walk?" Catherine's legs already ached from sitting so long. The thought of walking anywhere made her want to cry. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creaking of the coach and the horses' hooves on stone. The trees here were different from anything Catherine had seen before. Tall pines that seemed to touch the sky, their branches heavy with old snow. She saw a deer watching from the shadows. A hawk circled overhead. Once she thought she saw a bear, but it disappeared so quickly she couldn't be sure. This was wilderness, real wilderness, the kind she'd only read about in books, and she was heading deeper into it with every passing moment. When they finally reached the trading post, Catherine felt her heart sink. It was a rough log building standing alone in a clearing, with a stable and a few other small structures nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney. A few horses were tied up outside. "This is it," the driver said, pulling the coach to a stop. "Timber Ridge Trading Post. Good luck to you, miss." He helped her down and handed her the carpet bag. Then, without another word, he turned the coach around and headed back down the trail, leaving her standing there in the cold mountain air. Catherine walked slowly toward the trading post, her bag feeling heavier with each step. The door opened before she reached it, and a large man with a thick beard stepped out. "You looking for James Garrett?" he asked. "Yes," Catherine managed to say. The man looked her up and down, not unkindly but assessing. "He's not here. His place is about 5 miles up that trail." He pointed to a narrow path that led into the forest. "He don't come down much, especially this time of year. You'll have to walk it, 5 miles. Through the forest. Alone." Catherine felt panic rising in her chest. I can't or won't?" the man asked, his voice not unkind but firm. "Because if you can't, you might as well get back on that coach when it comes through again next week. But if you won't, well, that's different. That's just fear, and fear never helped nobody out here." Catherine stood there, trembling, looking at the trail disappearing into the trees. She thought about waiting a week, thought about getting back on that coach, going back to, what, Boston? She had no money, no home, nothing. The bearded man seemed to read her thoughts. "Look, miss, I don't know your story and I don't need to. But I know Garrett. He's a good man, quiet and keeps to himself but decent. He wouldn't have sent for you if he didn't mean to do right by you. And this life," he gestured at the mountains around them. "It's hard, but it's honest. You work hard, you get by. You don't. Simple as that." Catherine took a deep breath of the thin, cold air. Her whole body ached from weeks of travel. She was tired, scared, and so far from anything familiar it felt like being on another planet. But she picked up her bag. "Which way?" she asked. The man smiled, showing gaps where teeth should be. "Straight up that trail. Can't miss it. Stay on the path, don't wander off. You'll reach a clearing with a cabin. That's Garrett's place." Catherine nodded and started walking. The bag seemed to get heavier with each step. The trail was steep and rocky, winding between massive trees. Her city shoes, already worn from the long journey, weren't made for this kind of walking. She had to stop several times to catch her breath, her heart pounding from the thin air and the climb. The forest was so quiet it was almost frightening. No city sounds, no voices, just wind in the trees and the occasional call of a bird. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, her feet were blistering and her arms ached from carrying the bag. She wanted to stop, to rest, but she was afraid that if she sat down, she wouldn't be able to get up again. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, and Catherine realized with growing fear that she might not reach the cabin before dark. What then, sleep on the trail? She'd freeze to death. She pushed herself to walk faster, ignoring the pain in her feet and the burning in her lungs. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, the trees opened up ahead, a clearing. And in the clearing, a log cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. She'd made it. Catherine stood at the edge of the clearing, suddenly unable to move. This was it. Behind that door was the man she'd come all this way to marry. The man who'd written that cold, practical letter asking for a wife like someone might ask for livestock. What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? What if he was cruel or violent or drunk? What if this was the biggest mistake of her life? But she'd come too far to turn back now. There was nowhere else to go. Catherine forced her feet to move, crossing the clearing toward the cabin. Before she could knock, the door opened, and there he stood. Part 3, the mountain man's cabin. James Garrett heard her coming long before she reached the clearing. Years of living alone in the mountains had sharpened his senses. He could hear a deer moving through the forest from 100 yards away, could tell by the sound of footsteps whether it was man or beast approaching. These footsteps were different. Slow, unsteady, stopping frequently. City feet, unfamiliar with mountain trails. She was here, the woman from Boston who'd answered his letter. James stood at his window watching as she emerged from the tree line. She was smaller than he'd expected. Thin, with dark hair coming loose from its pins, she looked exhausted. Her face pale, her clothes covered in trail dust. For a moment, she just stood there at the edge of the clearing, staring at his cabin like it was a prison she'd been sentenced to. James felt something twist in his gut. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. What was he doing bringing a woman out here to this lonely place? What kind of life could he offer her? But it was too late for doubts now. She'd come all this way. The least he could do was open the door. When he did, her eyes went wide. James knew what she was seeing. A big man, over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of chopping wood and hauling water. His beard was thick and unkempt because he rarely bothered to trim it. His clothes were rough homespun, patched and mended. His hands were scarred and calloused from traps and axes and hard work. He probably looked like a bear standing in that doorway. "You came," he said, and his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. He hadn't spoken to another person in nearly 3 months. The woman, Catherine, according to the letter, lifted her chin slightly. Despite her obvious exhaustion and fear, there was something defiant in that gesture. Something that suggested she wouldn't break easily. "I had nowhere else to go," she said. James appreciated the honesty of that. No pretending this was a romantic adventure. No false enthusiasm. Just the plain truth. "Fair enough," he said. "Come in then. You must be tired." He stepped aside and Catherine walked past him into the cabin. He saw her taking it all in with quick, assessing glances. The single room with its rough wooden walls. The stone fireplace where a fire crackled. The narrow bed in one corner. The simple table with 2 chairs. The shelves holding his few possessions. The rifle mounted above the door. It wasn't much. He knew that. In Boston, this cabin would probably be considered a shed not fit for people to live in. But here in the mountains it was solid shelter, warm and dry. Catherine set down her bag and turned to face him. They stood there in awkward silence, 2 strangers who were supposed to be husband and wife, neither knowing quite what to say. "Are you hungry?" James finally asked. Yes, I haven't eaten since morning." "Sit down," I'll fix something. Catherine sat at the table, her movements careful like she was afraid of breaking something. James moved around the small kitchen area, putting together a simple meal. Venison stew that had been simmering all day. Fresh bread he'd baked that morning. Water from the spring. He wasn't much of a cook, but he'd learned to make do. Living alone meant learning all the things a wife would normally do. Cooking, mending clothes, keeping house. It wasn't fancy, but it kept a man alive. He set a bowl in front of her and sat down across the table with his own. Catherine picked up her spoon and tasted the stew. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "It's good," she said, and she sounded genuinely surprised. "Don't get too excited. I only know how to make about 3 things. You'll be sick of all of them within a week." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I can cook. I worked in a boarding house kitchen for 2 years." "Good. Because I'm a terrible cook." They ate in silence for a while. James watched her between bites, trying to read her. She ate slowly but finished everything in the bowl, suggesting she'd been hungry for longer than just today. Her clothes, while clean and carefully mended, were old and worn. Her hands had the redness and roughness of someone used to hard work. Mrs. Pemberton's letter had said Catherine was 32 and had worked as a seamstress. It had mentioned that she'd been rejected by several men before accepting James's offer. Reading between the lines, James had understood what that meant. She was desperate. Just like him. "I need to be honest with you," James said when they'd finished eating, "about what life here is like." Catherine met his eyes, waiting. "It's hard," he continued. "Harder than anything you've known in the city. Winter here can last 6 months. Sometimes we get snowed in for weeks at a time. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. The trading post is 5 miles, and in deep snow that can take half a day to reach. There's no doctor, no law, no church. If something goes wrong, you handle it yourself or you die." He saw her swallow hard, but she didn't look away. "I trap animals for their fur," he went on. "I sell the pelts at the trading post and use the money to buy what we can't make or grow ourselves. Sugar, salt, coffee, fabric, ammunition. Everything else we have to provide for ourselves. Meat from hunting. Vegetables from the garden in summer. Water from the spring. Firewood from the forest. It's constant work every day all year round." "I'm not afraid of work," Catherine said quietly. "I know. But this is different from city work. This is survival. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and you can die out here. Freeze to death, starve, get mauled by a bear, fall off a cliff, get lost in the woods. I've seen it happen to people who thought they were prepared." "Are you trying to scare me away?" Catherine asked. "Because if you are, it's too late. I've come too far. I have no money to leave and nowhere to go if I did." James shook his head. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to be honest. I don't want you to have false expectations about what this life will be like." "I don't have any expectations at all," Catherine said, and there was such weariness in her voice that James felt that twist in his gut again. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the forest darkening in the evening light. "I was married before," he said. 10 years ago. Her name was Rebecca. We had a daughter, just a baby, 8 months old." He heard Catherine's sharp intake of breath but didn't turn around. "Scarlet fever came through the settlement where we lived. Killed a dozen people in 2 weeks. My wife and daughter were among them." His voice sounded flat even to his own ears, but inside the pain was still there. A wound that never quite healed. "After they died, I couldn't stand to stay. Too many memories. So I came up here, to the mountains, as far from people as I could get." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. James turned to look at her. "I've been alone for nearly 10 years, and for most of that time I thought that's how I wanted it. But lately..." He trailed off, not sure how to explain the creeping loneliness that had become unbearable. The long winter nights when the silence was so heavy it felt like drowning. "Lately you've been lonely," Catherine finished for him. "Yes. So you sent for a wife. Any wife. It didn't matter who, as long as someone came." James heard the bitterness in her voice and understood it. "I know how that letter must have sounded. Cold, practical, like I was ordering equipment from a catalog. That's exactly what it sounded like. I'm not good with words. Never have been. I was trying to be honest about what I needed, but He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I made it sound like I just wanted a servant. That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" Catherine asked. James sat back down at the table, leaning forward on his elbows. I meant that I'm tired of being alone. I meant that this cabin is too quiet and the winters are too long and I'm going crazy with only my own thoughts for company. I meant that I want someone to talk to, someone to share this life with, someone to make this place feel like a home instead of just a shelter. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know this isn't a love match. I know you came because you had no other choice. But I'm hoping that maybe, over time, we can build something real here. A partnership. Maybe even a friendship. And maybe someday. He trailed off. Someday what? Catherine asked. Someday maybe it could be more than that, James said quietly. But I'm not expecting anything. I'm not demanding anything. You're here, and that's enough for now. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those tired eyes. Finally, she spoke. Where do I sleep? James felt his face heat up. The bed is yours. I'll sleep by the fire. For how long? For as long as you want me to. Something shifted in Catherine's expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe a glimmer of respect. Thank you, she said. For what? For being honest? For not... She paused, seeming to search for the right words. For not expecting things you haven't earned? James nodded. This is hard enough without adding more complications. We'll take it slow. Get to know each other. See how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, then we'll figure that out when we come to it. But I hope it does. He stood up. You must be exhausted. The bed's clean. I changed the sheets this morning. There's a nightdress in that trunk over there belonged to my wife. You're welcome to it if you want. Or use your own, doesn't matter to me. Catherine stood as well, swaying slightly. Now that she'd stopped moving, the exhaustion seemed to crash over her all at once. She gestured vaguely toward the bed. Go ahead. I'll be out here if you need anything. Catherine picked up her bag and moved toward the corner where the bed stood. Part 4. An arrangement of survival. The first morning, Catherine woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back. The cabin. The mountains. James. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body aching from the long journey. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see James moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to wake her. He was adding wood to the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Catherine pushed back the heavy quilts and stood up, smoothing down the nightdress she'd borrowed. Her own clothes would need washing after weeks of travel. Morning, James said when he heard her stir. He didn't turn around, giving her privacy. There's warm water in the basin if you want to wash up. Coffee's ready when you are. Thank you, Catherine said, her voice still rough with sleep. She washed her face and hands in the warm water, grateful for it. In the boarding house in Boston, the water had always been cold, and there'd never been enough of it. Here, James seemed to have thought ahead about what she might need. When she emerged from behind the curtain, dressed in her simplest work dress, James had breakfast laid out. Fried salt pork, cornmeal mush, and that bitter strong coffee. Not fancy, he said, but it'll keep you going. They ate in silence, the morning light coming through the single window, casting long shadows across the floor. Catherine found herself sneaking glances at James, trying to reconcile the rough mountain man with the consideration he'd shown her. After breakfast, James stood up. I need to check my trap lines. It'll take most of the day. You can rest, settle in, whatever you need. There's food in the larder if you get hungry. Can I come with you? The words surprised Catherine as much as they seemed to surprise James. It's a hard walk. Steep terrain. You're probably still tired from yesterday. I'm always tired, Catherine said. But I'd like to see what you do. Learn how things work here. James studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we need to get you better shoes first. Those city boots won't last a day out here. He rummaged in a wooden chest and pulled out a pair of sturdy leather boots. These were Rebecca's. She was about your size. They're good boots made for mountain walking. Catherine took them, feeling strange about wearing a dead woman's shoes. But practical sense won out over sentiment. Her own boots were already falling apart. The boots fit well enough, and James showed her how to tie them properly, tight around the ankle for support. Then he handed her a heavy wool coat. It's going to be cold in the shade, and if you're coming with me, you need to be able to keep up. I can't be stopping every few minutes. I'll keep up, Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. They set out into the forest, following trails that Catherine couldn't even see. James moved through the wilderness like he was part of it, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that meant nothing to her. He showed her his trap lines, explaining how he set snares for rabbits and larger traps for fox and beaver. Catherine tried not to look at the dead animals caught in the traps, but James was matter-of-fact about it. Their pelts feed us, clothe us, give us money to survive. It's not cruel, it's life. Out here, everything eats something else. That's just how it works. He taught her how to reset the traps, how to read animal tracks, how to tell which berries were safe to eat, and which would make her sick. Catherine's head spun with information, but she tried to remember it all. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes, James said as they walked. If you get lost, if you eat the wrong thing, if you're not prepared for sudden weather changes, you die. It's that simple. You're really determined to scare me, aren't you? Catherine said, breathing hard as they climbed a steep slope. I'm determined to keep you alive, James replied. Fear is healthy out here. It keeps you careful. By midday, Catherine's legs were shaking with exhaustion, but she refused to complain. James noticed anyway and called a halt near a small stream. Rest, he said. Drink, we'll head back soon. Catherine sat on a fallen log, grateful beyond words. She cupped water from the stream and drank, the cold liquid sharp and sweet. Nothing like the stale water in the Boston boarding house. You did well, James said, sitting down nearby. Better than I expected for your first day. I've worked hard my whole life, Catherine said. Just not this kind of work. Tell me, James said. Tell me about your life before. So Catherine told him. About losing her parents young. About the orphanage, then the years of sewing. 14-hour days in dim light that ruined her eyes. About growing older and more invisible. About the rejection letters from men who wanted younger wives. About the slow realization that she would die alone and forgotten if something didn't change. James listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry life was so hard for you, he finally said. You deserved better, did I? Catherine asked. I'm not sure anyone deserves anything. We just get what we get and try to survive it. That's a bleak way to look at things. That's a realistic way to look at things. James stood up, offering her his hand to help her rise. Maybe out here we can both find something better than just survival. Maybe we can actually live. Catherine took his hand, feeling the calloused strength of it. Maybe, she said, though she didn't quite believe it yet. The days settled into a pattern. Each morning, Catherine would wake to find James already up, the fire going, coffee ready. They'd eat breakfast together, then tackle the day's work. James taught her everything. How to skin animals without damaging the pelts. How to smoke meat so it would last through the winter. How to preserve vegetables in salt brine. How to make soap from animal fat and lye. How to recognize weather changes in the color of the sky and the behavior of birds. Catherine proved herself a quick learner. Her seamstress fingers, so skilled with needle and thread, adapted well to other delicate work. She could clean a fish, mend a snare, prepare medicine from herbs. What she lacked in strength, she made up for in determination. In the evenings after the work was done, they would sit by the fire. This was Catherine's favorite time. James would read aloud from his small collection of books, adventure stories, poetry, essays on natural philosophy. His voice was deep and pleasant, and Catherine found herself looking forward to these quiet hours. Sometimes they talked instead. Catherine learned that James had been a schoolteacher in his previous life, that he loved learning and missed having someone to discuss ideas with. She discovered that beneath his rough exterior was a thoughtful, intelligent man who'd chosen isolation not because he disliked people, but because the pain of losing his family had been unbearable. Do you still miss them? Catherine asked one evening. Your wife and daughter? Every day, James said quietly. But it's different now. Before the grief was so sharp it felt like drowning. Now it's softer, more like an old scar that aches when the weather changes. Do you think you'll ever stop missing them? No, but I think I can build a new life alongside the missing. Does that make sense? Catherine nodded. She understood. She'd lost her parents so long ago, but there were still moments when she wished she could tell them something, share something with them, only to remember they were gone. What about you? James asked. Is there anyone you miss? Anyone you left behind? No, Catherine said. That's the saddest part, isn't it? I lived in Boston for my entire life, and there's not a single person who will miss me now that I'm gone. I'd miss you, James said. If you were gone. Catherine looked at him surprised. In the firelight, his face looked gentler than usual, less guarded. Would you? She asked. Yes, these past few weeks, having you here. It's made this place feel different. Better. Like I said that first night, like a home instead of just a shelter. Catherine felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not love, not yet. But something that might become friendship or trust, or maybe eventually something more. James, she said carefully, when you asked me to come here, you mentioned wanting children, a family. James shifted uncomfortably. I did, but I meant what I said. I'm not expecting anything. You're here, you're helping, that's enough. What if… Catherine paused, gathering her courage. What if it could be more? Not right now, but eventually? James met her eyes. Are you saying you'd want that? I'm saying I'm not opposed to the idea. In time. When we've gotten to know each other better, when this feels less like an arrangement and more like… She struggled for the word. A marriage? James offered. Yes. James reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since that day on the trail when he'd helped her up from the log. Then we'll take our time, he said. No rush, we'll let this grow naturally if it's going to grow. And if it doesn't, then we'll still be partners. Still be friends, I hope. This place is big enough for two people who respect each other, even if there's nothing more than that. Catherine squeezed his hand. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for giving this a chance. For giving me a chance. They sat there, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to coals. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, soft white flakes drifting past the window. Winter was coming to the mountains. But inside the cabin there was warmth and the beginnings of something that neither of them had dared hope for. Part 5. The whispered question. Winter came to the mountains like a closing fist. The snow that had started as gentle flakes became a constant presence, piling deeper and deeper until the cabin was surrounded by white that reached past the windows. Catherine had thought Boston winters were harsh, but she'd known nothing. Here, the cold was alive. A thing with teeth and claws that tried to find every gap in the cabin walls, every crack around the door. The wind howled like wolves, and some nights the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in its bucket despite the roaring fire. For weeks at a time, they were trapped inside. Going outside meant bundling in layers of wool and fur, and even then you couldn't stay out long before the cold started to hurt. James still had to check his traps and bring in firewood, but these expeditions were brief and dangerous. Catherine learned what James had meant about survival. Everything became about staying warm, staying fed, staying alive until spring. They burned through wood at an alarming rate, and James spent hours each day splitting logs. Catherine helped as much as she could, though her smaller frame meant she tired more quickly. But something unexpected happened during those long, isolated months. Forced together in that small cabin with nowhere to go and nothing to do but survive and talk, Catherine and James became friends, real friends. They talked about everything, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. James told her about his childhood on a small farm, how he'd fought to get an education, how teaching had been his passion. Catherine shared memories of her parents, the few good years before they died, the things her mother had taught her about finding beauty in small moments. They played games James carved from wood. Simple chess pieces, checkers, dice for backgammon. They read aloud to each other, taking turns, sometimes discussing the stories long into the night. James taught Catherine arithmetic and basic science. Catherine taught James a card game her father had shown her as a child. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Catherine discovered that James was funny when he relaxed, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. She learned that he was thoughtful and kind, that he felt things deeply even though he didn't show it easily. She saw how gentle he was with injured animals, how he'd curse himself for setting traps but knew it was necessary for survival. James learned that Catherine was stronger than she looked, both physically and in spirit. He saw how she never complained, even when the work was hard and her hands were raw. He discovered she had a beautiful voice and would sometimes sing quietly while sewing. He realized she was clever, picking up new skills quickly and often finding better ways to do things. More than that, they became comfortable with each other. The awkwardness of those first weeks faded. They developed routines, moved around each other naturally in the small space. James no longer slept by the fire, but on a pallet he'd made in the corner, giving them both more privacy, but neither crossed the invisible line that separated their sleeping areas. Until one night in the deep of winter, when everything changed. A storm had been raging for 3 days. The wind was so strong it shook the cabin, and snow piled so high against the door they couldn't have opened it if they'd wanted to. They were burning through their wood supply faster than usual just to keep the cold at bay. Catherine sat close to the fire, sewing by the light of a precious candle. She was mending one of James's shirts, her fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions. James sat nearby, carving something from a piece of wood, shavings falling around his feet. "What are you making?" Catherine asked. James held up the piece. It was starting to take the shape of a bird, a cardinal. Rebecca used to love them, said they looked like little flames against the snow. It was the first time in weeks he'd mentioned his first wife. Catherine set down her sewing. "Do you think about her often?" she asked gently. "Not as much as I used to," James admitted. "These past months with you here, I think about her less and think about other things more." "What other things?" James was quiet for a moment, the knife still in his hands. "The future. What comes next? What I want." Catherine felt her heart beat faster. "And what do you want?" James set down the carving and looked at her. Really looked at her in a way that made Catherine's breath catch. "I want this to be real," he said quietly. "Not just an arrangement. Not just two people surviving together. I want this to be a marriage. A real one." Catherine's hand stilled on the fabric. "James, I know we agreed to take it slow," he continued, the words coming faster now like he'd been holding them back for too long. "I know you came here because you had no choice. But Catherine, these months with you they've been the happiest I've been in 10 years. Maybe longer. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make this cabin feel like a home." He stood up and moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I'm not asking you to love me," James said. "I know that might never happen. But I'm asking if you'd consider making this marriage real. If you'd consider building a real life with me, not just surviving together." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have told you before." "What is it?" "I'm 32, James. I might not be able to give you children. I might be too old. And I know that's what you wanted, what you asked for in that letter. Sons and daughters to fill this cabin. But I might not be able to give you that." James reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Do you know what I realized these past months?" Catherine shook her head. "I realized that letter was written by a desperate, lonely man who didn't know what he really wanted. He thought he wanted children, someone to carry on his name, give his life meaning. But what he really wanted was this: companionship, partnership, someone to share his life with, whether there are children or not." "But if there are no children," Catherine started. "Then there are no children," James said firmly. "And we build a life anyway. The two of us. That's enough. You're enough." Catherine felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard shell she'd built around her heart years ago. No one had ever told her she was enough. Not just acceptable, not just tolerable, but enough exactly as she was. "James," she whispered, "I need to tell you something else." "What?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." She saw the shock on his face, then the hope, then the joy. "You are?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I am. I fought it at first because I thought this was just an arrangement, just survival. But somewhere between learning to skin rabbits and listening to you read poetry by firelight, I fell in love with you." James laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Catherine, I've been in love with you for weeks. I just didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you'd think I was pressuring you. You've never pressured me, not once. You've only ever been patient and kind and good to me." James took both her hands in his. "Then let me ask you properly. Catherine, will you truly be my wife? Will you share my life, my bed, my future? Will you build a family with me? Whether that means children or just the two of us." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fire crackled and popped. And in that small cabin at the top of the world, Catherine felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Real, honest hope for the future. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." James pulled her down from the chair and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened with months of restrained longing. Catherine wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his heart pounding against hers. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice shaking, "will you bear my sons?" My daughters? However many we're blessed with, or none at all, will you be the mother of my children if we're so fortunate, and my partner in all things if we're not? It was the question she'd been both dreading and hoping for, the question that had brought her here across thousands of miles. But now it wasn't a demand or an expectation. It was an offering, a possibility, a dream they might share. I will, Catherine said. I'll try. I'll hope. And if it doesn't happen, I'll still be your wife, your partner, the person who stands beside you through everything. That's all I could ever ask, James said. He stood and held out his hand. Catherine took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They stood there in the firelight looking at each other, both understanding what came next. Are you sure? James asked. We can wait longer if you need to. I'm sure, Catherine said. I'm tired of waiting for my life to start. I want it to start now. With you. James led her to the bed, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the cabin months ago, Catherine followed him there willingly, hopefully, lovingly. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind screamed and the snow fell thick and heavy. But inside, two people who'd been broken and lonely and desperate found each other in the darkness and created something new. Not just survival. Not just an arrangement, but love. Real, honest love that had grown slowly in the cold and the isolation. That had been built on respect and friendship and genuine caring. As Catherine lay in James's arms later, listening to his heartbeat slow into sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The rejection letters. The desperate decision to answer James's crude request. The long, exhausting trip west. The fear and uncertainty of those first. Part 6. A choice made free. The morning after was different. Catherine woke slowly, awareness returning in layers. The warmth of the bed, the unfamiliar weight of an arm across her waist, the sound of breathing that wasn't her own. James, she opened, her eyes to find him already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Good morning, he said softly. Good morning. Catherine felt suddenly shy, which was silly considering what had passed between them in the night. But this was different. This was daylight, reality, the beginning of something new and uncertain. Do you regret it? James asked, and she heard the vulnerability in his voice. No, Catherine said firmly. Do you? Not for a second. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But I need to know something. Last night when you said yes, was it because you wanted to, or because you felt you had to? Catherine propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. James Garrett, I need you to understand something. For my entire life, I've done things because I had to. I worked because I had to eat. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. But last night was the first time in my entire life I did something purely because I wanted to. She saw relief flood his face. I chose you, she continued. Not because you were my only option, but because you're who I want. You, with your patient hands and your kind heart and your terrible coffee. You who reads me poetry and teaches me about the mountains and never once made me feel like I was less than I am. My coffee isn't that bad, James protested weakly. Catherine laughed. Your coffee is awful, but I love you anyway. Say that again, James said. Your coffee is awful. The other part. I love you. The words felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar. She'd never said them to anyone before. But they felt right. I love you, James. He pulled her down for a kiss. And this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just two people who'd found each other against all odds. The days that followed took on a different quality. The cabin was the same, the work was the same, the brutal winter was the same, but everything felt new. Catherine caught herself smiling for no reason while doing chores. James would touch her as he passed by, small gestures of affection that spoke of connection. They sat closer by the fire at night. They talked more freely, sharing dreams and fears they'd kept hidden before. I'm scared, Catherine admitted one evening as they lay in bed. The wind outside was howling, but here under the quilts, wrapped in James's warmth, she felt safe enough to be honest. Of what? James asked. of losing this. I've never had something good in my life. I keep waiting for it to be taken away. James was quiet for a moment. I used to feel the same way. After Rebecca and the baby died, I was terrified of caring about anything. That's why I came up here to these mountains. I thought if I didn't care about anything, I couldn't lose anything. What changed? You did. You made me realize that being afraid of loss isn't living. It's just existing. And I was tired of existing. I wanted to live again. He kissed her forehead. Yes, something bad might happen. We might lose each other someday. That's how life works. But would you rather have never known this? Never felt this? No, Catherine said. Even if I lost you tomorrow, I wouldn't trade these months for anything. Then we live, we love. We take each day as it comes and be grateful for it. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Catherine began to notice changes in her body. At first, she dismissed them. A little nausea in the mornings, probably from James's cooking. Unusual tiredness, probably from the hard work. But when she missed her monthly courses once and then twice, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was pregnant. Catherine stood at the cabin window one morning, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, feeling a mixture of joy and terror. She'd thought this might never happen, that she was too old, that her body had missed its chance, but life, it seemed, had other plans. What are you thinking about? James asked, coming up behind her. Catherine turned to face him. I need to tell you something. He must have seen it in her face because his expression changed immediately, a mixture of hope and fear. What is it? I'm pregnant. For a moment, James didn't move. Then he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. You're sure? He asked, his voice muffled against her hair. As sure as I can be. I've missed my courses twice now, and I've been sick in the mornings. James pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears streaming down his face. Catherine, I don't have words. Are you happy? She asked, needing to hear it. Happy? James laughed, wiping his eyes. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and scared out of my mind all at once. But yes, I'm happy. So incredibly happy. He knelt down and placed his hands gently on her stomach. Hello in there, he said softly. I'm your father. I'm going to do my best by you, I promise. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. James, I'm scared too. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm too old? What if everything goes right? James interrupted, standing up. What if this baby is healthy and strong? What if we have a beautiful child who fills this cabin with laughter? You make it sound so easy. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But we'll face it together. He took both her hands. Catherine, I lost a child once. I know what that grief feels like, and I'm scared too. But I won't let fear steal this joy from us. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Catherine nodded, letting herself lean into his strength. Together, she agreed. The news changed everything and nothing. The work still had to be done, the trap still needed checking, the wood still needed splitting. But now there was a future taking shape, something real and tangible to work toward. James became almost comically protective. He didn't want Catherine lifting heavy things or working too hard. She had to remind him constantly that she wasn't made of glass, that pregnant women had been doing physical work since the beginning of time. I know, he'd say, but they weren't carrying my child. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, James began expanding the cabin. He worked long hours, adding a second room that would serve as a nursery. We have months yet, Catherine said, watching him measure and cut boards. I want it to be ready. I want everything to be ready. Catherine understood. He was trying to control what he could, trying to build a safe place for their child. It was his way of fighting the fear. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Catherine, sewing tiny clothes while James carved a cradle, he spoke suddenly. I need to tell you something. Catherine looked up. What is it? When Rebecca was pregnant, I wasn't a good husband. I was young and scared, and I didn't know how to handle it. I worked all the time, stayed away from the house, made excuses. I thought I was giving her space, but really I was running from my own fear. He set down the cradle, his hands shaking slightly. And then she died, and I never got to tell her I was sorry. I never got to tell her that I loved her and our baby. More than anything, that I was just too afraid to show it. Catherine set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him. James, you were young, you didn't know. That doesn't make it right. He looked at her, his eyes red. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm going to be here, present, involved. I'm going to tell you every day how much you mean to me. I'm not going to let fear make me a coward again. You're not a coward, Catherine said firmly. You're one of the bravest men I know. You opened your heart again after losing everything. That takes real courage. James pulled her close. You make me brave, he said. You make me want to be better. You don't need to be better. You're already everything I need. They sat together in the firelight, and Catherine felt a peace she'd never known before. This was her family now. This man, this cabin, this child growing inside her. She thought about the woman she'd been in Boston, bitter and hopeless, standing in that matrimonial agency believing she was unwanted and unlovable. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she never would have believed it, but it was true. All of it. James? She said softly. Yes? Do you remember when you asked me if I would bear your sons? Your daughters? Of course. I need you to know something. I'm not doing this because you asked. I'm not giving you a child out of obligation or duty. I'm doing this because I choose to. Because I want to build a family with you. Because you gave me the one thing I never thought I'd have. What's that? A choice. You gave me the freedom to choose you, to choose this life, to choose love. You never demanded or expected. You just offered and waited and let me decide. James was quiet for a long moment. I learned something from losing Rebecca, he finally said. I learned that love isn't about possession or control. It's about offering everything you are and hoping the other person chooses to stay. I choose to stay, Catherine said. Every day for the rest of my life, I choose you. And I choose you, James replied. I'll keep choosing you every day, no matter what comes. Outside, the snow was melting. The first birds had returned, their songs filling the air. Spring was coming to the mountains, bringing with it new life and new possibilities. And inside the cabin, two people who'd found each other against all odds held each other close and dreamed of the future. A future they'd chosen together. A future built not on desperation or necessity, but on genuine love and respect and partnership. Part 7. Spring's promise. Spring came fully to the mountains, transforming the white wilderness into an explosion of color and life. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows. The streams ran fast and cold with snowmelt. Birds filled the trees with song, and Catherine's belly grew round with their child. She'd never felt so alive. Despite the morning sickness that plagued her well into her 4th month, despite the aches and discomforts of her changing body, Catherine felt a joy so profound it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. James was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He barely let her lift a water bucket, insisted she rest frequently, worried constantly. Catherine found it both endearing and frustrating. I'm pregnant, not dying, she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I know, but nothing. Women have been doing chores while pregnant since the dawn of time. I promise you I'll be fine. Still, she appreciated his concern even when it bordered on ridiculous. It came from love, from fear of loss, from wanting so desperately to protect what they'd built together. As her pregnancy progressed, they began to prepare in earnest. James finished the nursery, building a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate patterns into the wood. Catherine sewed tiny clothes, blankets, and swaddling cloths, her fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions. One day in early summer, they had visitors. Catherine heard voices outside and looked out to see James talking with two people. A man and a woman, both weathered by mountain life but friendly looking. Catherine, James called. Come meet our neighbors. Catherine went outside, shading her eyes against the bright sun. The man was tall and lean with kind eyes. The woman was small and sturdy, with black hair streaked with gray and a face that seemed made for smiling. "This is Henry and May Chen," James said. "They have a homestead about 4 miles west." "May Henry, this is my wife, Catherine." "Your wife?" May's face lit up. "We heard you'd married, but we didn't believe it." James Garrett, the hermit of the mountains, with a wife. She looked at Catherine's rounded belly. And expecting. How wonderful. Catherine liked her immediately. There was warmth in May's eyes. None of the judgment or pity Catherine had grown so used to in Boston. "Come in, please," Catherine said. "I'll make tea." They spent the afternoon talking, and Catherine learned their story. Henry was a fur trapper like James. May had come from China as a young woman, had married Henry against both their families' wishes, and had lived in these mountains for 20 years. "People think mountain life is lonely," May said, sipping her tea, "but I find it peaceful. In the city, everyone watches, everyone judges. Here, people let you be who you are." "I'm learning that," Catherine said. When May learned it was Catherine's first child and that she'd have no doctor or midwife nearby, she became serious. "You need help," she said firmly. "First babies can be difficult. I've birthed 3 of my own and helped with a dozen others in these mountains. When your time comes, send James to fetch me." "I'll come." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You would do that?" "Of course. We mountain folk look after each other. That's how we survive." After the Chens left, promising to visit again soon, Catherine felt something shift inside her. She'd thought coming to the mountains meant isolation, being cut off from people. But she was discovering a different kind of community here. Smaller, more spread out, but perhaps more genuine than anything she'd known in Boston. Over the next month, she met other mountain families. The Johnsons, who had 4 children and a sheep farm. The Blackwell brothers, who ran a sawmill. A widow named Ruth, who lived alone and was tougher than most men. Each one welcomed Catherine, offered advice about mountain living, promised to help when the baby came. "I thought we were alone up here," Catherine said to James one evening. "We are, in a way. But alone doesn't mean isolated. People here understand what it takes to survive. We help each other because we have to." As summer progressed, Catherine's pregnancy became more difficult. The heat was oppressive at times, and she grew large and uncomfortable. Simple tasks became challenges. She couldn't see her feet. Getting up from a chair required help. Sleep was elusive, the baby pressing on her lungs and bladder. James was patient through all of it, rubbing her aching back, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, holding her when she cried from exhaustion and discomfort. "I'm sorry," she said one night, frustrated with her own body's limitations. "Sorry for what?" James asked, genuinely confused. "For being useless. For not being able to help properly. For being so big and slow and—" "Stop," James said gently. "You're growing, our child. That's not useless. That's the most important work there is. But the garden needs tending and the preserving and I'll do it. Or it won't get done and we'll manage anyway. Catherine, you're not a failure because you need help right now. You're doing something I could never do. Something miraculous." She leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. "I'm scared, James. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll face it together. But let's not borrow trouble. For now, let's just focus on today." The baby came in early autumn when the leaves were just starting to turn gold and red. Catherine woke in the middle of the night with a pain so sharp it took her breath away. She lay there for a moment, wondering if it was just the usual discomfort, but then another pain came, stronger than the first. "James," she whispered. "James, wake up." He was awake instantly, years of mountain living making him alert even from deep sleep. "What is it?" "The baby. I think it's time." Catherine saw fear flash across his face, quickly replaced by determination. "I'll get May. Don't move. Don't do anything. Just stay here. James." "I'm not going anywhere," Catherine said, trying to smile despite the pain. He dressed quickly and was out the door within minutes, racing through the dark forest toward the Chen's homestead. Catherine was alone, feeling another contraction build and crest. She tried to remember everything May had told her during their visits, all the advice about breathing and staying calm. It seemed like hours before James returned with May, though it was probably less than one. May came through the door like a small tornado, all efficiency and confidence. "Good, you're still in early labor," she said, examining Catherine quickly. "This will take time. First babies always do. James, boil water, lots of it. Then wait outside. I'm not leaving her, James said firmly. May looked at him, then at Catherine. You want him here? Catherine reached for James's hand. Yes, please. All right then. But you do what I say when I say it. Understood? They both nodded. The labor lasted through the night and well into the next day. Catherine had never known such pain existed. Wave after wave of contractions that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. She screamed. She cried. She begged for it to stop. James stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached, wiping sweat from her face, whispering encouragement even when his own face was pale with fear. You're doing so well, he kept saying. So strong. I'm so proud of you. May was a constant presence, checking Catherine's progress, offering sips of water, guiding her through each contraction. That's it, breathe through it. Don't fight the pain, work with it. Your body knows what to do. As evening approached, May's expression became more serious. Catherine, it's time to push. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push as hard as you can. Catherine was exhausted, every muscle in her body screaming. But she nodded. When the contraction came, she pushed with everything she had. Again, May commanded. Push! Catherine pushed again and again until she thought she couldn't anymore. She heard James's voice in her ear, steady and strong. You can do this. I know you can. Just a little more, Catherine. Just a little more. And then with one final push that seemed to take every ounce of strength she had left, the baby came. The room filled with the sound of crying. Strong, healthy crying. A boy, May announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. You have a son! Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, barely able to process what had just happened. May quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Catherine's arms. Catherine looked down at her son and felt her entire world shift. He was perfect. Tiny and wrinkled and perfect. She touched his little hand and his fingers wrapped around hers instinctively. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. James was crying openly, kneeling beside the bed, staring at his son in wonder. He's beautiful. Catherine, he's so beautiful. What will you name him? May asked, smiling. Catherine and James looked at each other. They'd discussed names, but now that the moment was here, Catherine knew exactly what she wanted. Thomas, she said. Thomas James Garrett. After my father and his. Thomas, James repeated, testing the name. Perfect. May stayed for another hour, making sure both Catherine and the baby were healthy and stable. Before she left, she pulled James aside. She did well. The boy is strong. But watch her carefully for the next few days. If she develops a fever, or the bleeding gets worse, come get me immediately. I will, James promised. May, thank you. I don't know how to repay you. Help someone else when they need it, May said simply. That's how it works up here. After May left, James and Catherine lay together in the bed, their son between them. Thomas was sleeping now, peaceful and content. Part 8. The Family. They built 5 years passed like water flowing down the mountain, each season bringing its own rhythms and challenges. The cabin that had once felt almost too big for 2 people now seemed to burst at the seams with life and noise and laughter. Thomas was 5 now, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's quick mind. He followed James everywhere, chattering constantly, asking endless questions about everything he saw. Papa, why do birds fly south? Papa, where does snow come from? Papa, can I help check the traps? 2 years after Thomas came Eleanor, named after Catherine's mother. She was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with a serious face that would suddenly break into a smile that lit up the whole room. At 3 years old, she was already showing signs of her mother's skill with needle and thread, sitting for long stretches to help Catherine with simple sewing. And then just a year ago, Benjamin had arrived. A chubby, happy baby who seemed to find everything delightful. His laughter filled the cabin. And even James, who tried to maintain some semblance of discipline with the older children, melted completely when Benjamin smiled at him. 3 children. Catherine sometimes looked at them and couldn't believe they were real, that they were hers. The woman who'd been told she was too old, too plain, too unwanted, had somehow been blessed with 3 beautiful, healthy children. The cabin had grown too. James had added 2 more rooms, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. There was a proper bedroom for Catherine and James now, a room for the children, and the original cabin space served as kitchen and living area. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and warm and filled with love. James had built a small schoolhouse about half a mile from their cabin. 4 other mountain families sent their children there, and James taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, and natural science. Watching him with the children, Catherine saw him come alive in a way that reminded her he'd been a teacher in his former life. This was his calling, and he'd found a way back to it. Catherine had discovered her own talent. Her quilts, made from scraps and sewn during the long winter months, had caught the eye of a merchant at the trading post. He'd asked if she'd make more to sell. What had started as a way to keep warm had become a thriving business. Her quilts were now sold as far away as Denver, bringing in money that helped the family not just survive but prosper. They'd also expanded their homestead. James had cleared more land for a larger garden. They had chickens now and 2 goats for milk. A pair of horses made travel easier and helped with heavy work. The trading post was no longer a 5-mile walk but a comfortable hour's ride. But more than physical growth, their life had grown rich with community. The mountain families gathered regularly, celebrating births, helping with difficult tasks, mourning losses together. Catherine had found friendships here that she'd never had in Boston. Real friendships built on mutual respect and shared hardship. Machen had become especially close. She visited often, teaching Catherine herbal remedies and sharing stories about her own journey from China to these mountains. Their children played together, and sometimes May would stay overnight. The 2 women talking late into the evening while James and Henry smoked pipes and discussed trapping routes. One summer evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and pink, the whole family sat outside the cabin. James had built a broad porch over the years, and it had become their favorite place when weather allowed. Thomas was teaching Eleanor how to whistle, the 2 of them producing sounds that made Benjamin laugh and clap his hands. Catherine sat in her rocking chair, mending one of Thomas's shirts that he'd torn climbing a tree. James sat on the porch steps, whittling a toy horse for Benjamin. "Papa, tell us again how you and Mama met," Thomas said suddenly. "Again?" James laughed. "I've told you that story 100 times, but I like it," Thomas insisted. "Please?" James looked at Catherine and she smiled and nodded. Their eyes met over the children's heads, sharing a moment of understanding about how far they'd come. "All right," James said, setting down his carving. "Your mama came from far away, from a big city called Boston, all the way across the country. Why did she come?" Eleanor asked, though she'd heard this story many times too. "Because I asked her to," James said simply. He never told them about the desperation, the rejection letters, the harsh realities that had brought Catherine to the mountains. That was their private history. For the children, it was simply a story of 2 people who'd found each other. "I took a very long train ride," Catherine added, "for weeks and weeks watching the land change outside my window." "And you weren't scared?" Thomas asked. "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "I didn't know what I'd find here or who your papa would be. But then you saw him and you loved him right away," Eleanor declared. Catherine and James exchanged another look, this one amused. "Not exactly right away," Catherine said gently. "Love takes time to grow, sweetheart. Like a garden. You plant seeds, you water them, you tend them carefully, and slowly, something beautiful grows. But you do love him now, right?" Thomas asked, suddenly serious. "More than anything," Catherine said, and meant it with her whole heart. "Except maybe you 3 troublemakers." "Hey," Thomas protested, but he was grinning. As the children ran off to play before bedtime, Catherine and James sat together in comfortable silence. Benjamin had fallen asleep in Catherine's arms, his chubby cheeks flushed with the day's fresh air. "Can you believe this is our life?" Catherine said softly. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," James admitted. 5 years ago I was alone in that cabin, so lonely I could barely stand it. Now," he gestured at the children playing, at the expanded homestead, at everything they'd built together. "Now I have everything I never dared dream of. Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "Sending that letter asking for a mail-order bride?" James turned to look at her. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't do it sooner. Every day without you was a day wasted." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, though she was smiling. "I used to think being rejected by all those men was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But now I see it was the best thing, because it brought me here to you." "To us," James corrected, looking at their children. Later that night, After the children were finally asleep, Catherine and James lay in their bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain night. An owl hooting in the distance, the wind sighing through the pines, the creek babbling over stones. "Do you remember that first winter?" Catherine asked. "When we were so awkward around each other, barely knowing what to say?" "I remember being terrified you'd wake up one morning and ask me to take you back to town," James said. "I remember thinking you'd reject me too, like everyone else had, and instead we fell in love." "We did," Catherine agreed. She turned to face him in the darkness. "James, do you remember what you asked me that night during the storm?" "I asked you a lot of things that night," James said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "You asked if I would bear your sons, your daughters, if I would build a family with you, and you said yes. I said yes because you gave me something no one else ever had. You gave me a choice. You asked, you didn't demand. You waited for me to be ready. You let me choose you." James pulled her closer. "That's the only way real love works. Not force, not obligation. Just two people choosing each other every single day." "I choose you," Catherine whispered, "today and every day." "And I choose you," James replied. They lay there in the darkness, and Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the rejection, the desperate decision to answer a crude letter from a lonely mountain man. All of it had led to this moment. 3 beautiful children sleeping in the next room. A man who loved her deeply and truly. A home she'd helped build with her own hands. A community of friends who valued her. A life that had meaning and purpose and joy. She was no longer the unwanted woman. She was no longer the desperate mail-order bride. She was Catherine Garrett, mother, wife, craftswoman, friend. She was someone who mattered. Someone who was loved. Someone who had found her place in the world. The next morning, Catherine woke to Benjamin's babbling and Thomas's voice trying to quiet him. She heard Eleanor's soft singing, a lullaby Catherine had taught her, and beneath it all, James's deep voice in the kitchen, making breakfast and humming to himself. She lay there for a moment, just listening, feeling grateful for the noise and chaos and beautiful mess of family life. Then she got up because there was work to do. Children to feed, clothes to mend, a garden to tend, quilts to sew. The work never ended on a mountain homestead, but it wasn't just survival anymore. It was living. Really, truly living. Catherine walked into the kitchen and kissed James good morning. She helped Thomas button his shirt and braided Eleanor's hair. She fed Benjamin his porridge and wiped his messy face. She looked around at her family, her home, her life, and she smiled. Because every rejection letter had been leading here. Every lonely night in Boston had been pointing toward this moment. Every time someone had told her she was too old, too plain, too unwanted, the universe had been preparing her for something better, for this man who'd whispered the question that changed everything, for these children who called her mama, for this life that was hard and beautiful and real.